Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. James, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Modernizing Government IT while Ensuring Compliance Amid Innovation. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Special thanks to our panelists for joining us and sharing their insights here today. My name again, James McKenna. I'm Vice President here at Leadership Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. What we'll be talking about is, of course, as government agencies are modernizing their IT, we all know the landscape is changing faster than ever, and things that used to be buzzwords like AI or zero trust architecture, cloud computing, they're now really fundamentally shaping how agencies achieve their mission success. But there's also increased demand for regulatory compliance, and agility is more important than ever. And it's really critical for ensuring the security and effectiveness of public sector IT. So today, our panelists will talk through how AI, automation, cloud solutions are really reshaping government operations, what it means to integrate innovation within structured compliance frameworks, and why collaboration, trust building, they're really essential for modernization of success, as well as ability to innovate quickly and learn from each other. But most importantly, our panelists will share with us real-world practical insights from what they've experienced, what they experience every day. Before we get going, I do have a couple of housekeeping things to cover. So Leadership Connect, we are a NASBA CPE credit sponsor. So there are CPE credits available for this webinar today. So if you're interested in receiving CPE credits, please listen. So this, again, webinar is up for one CPE credit in the information technology field of study. In order to receive that credit, you have to ensure that you meet the attendance and participation requirements. So we're going to ask 3 polling questions throughout this webinar. If you want to obtain those CPE credits, you do have to respond to all 3 of those polling questions. And as a reminder, so we're registered with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, NASBA, as a sponsor of continuing professional education credits. They have the final authority and acceptance of individual courses for CPE credits. So any complaints registered by the sponsors may be submitted to the National Registry of CPE Sponsors through its website, nasbaregistry.org. Obviously, if any of our participants have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. But this is supposed to be conversational, and nobody wants to hear me talk for an hour. So we're looking forward to introducing our panelists. So today on the call with us, we have Nathan Long, who's the Senior Technical Director and Deputy CTO for DISA J9. We have Jeanette Duncan, who is the CIO within Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA. We also have Joe Klimavicz, who's the Senior Services Manager, Agency Competition Advocate, and Director of Component Acquisition Staff at DCSA, and Mark Matzke, who's the Area Vice President of Defense for ServiceNow. So to kick off, I'll pass over to the panelists, if you don't mind giving the audience an introduction of yourself, current role, career history, and what your core responsibilities are. Mark, you're top left of my screen, so I'll pass over to you to start.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, my name is Mark Matzke. I work with at ServiceNow. Been here for just over 10 years, but total of about a little over 20 years of working with the government, both inside and out. Started off as a Marine infantry officer, and after my time there, transitioned into technology and found my way to ServiceNow. I manage the defense practice for the company.
Thanks, Mark. And Jeanette, over to you.
Good afternoon, Jeanette Duncan, currently the CIO at DCSA, that's Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. I have been the CIO for Army installations, CIO for Air Force, Financial Management and Comptroller, CIO for National Endowment for the Arts, Deputy CIO for USDA's Agricultural Research Service. So been around, been doing this a while, and look forward to talking with everyone today.
Thanks, Jeanette. And Joe, over to you for another long list of CIO titles in your history.
James, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me on allow me to participate in the panel. So I'm the Senior Acquisition Advisor, Senior Services Manager, and Director of our Component Acquisition Executive Staff at DCSA. In this capacity, I advise and help the agency's acquisition activities to ensure compliance with applicable federal acquisition laws, DoD policies and regulations, and acquisition best practices. Career history, 42 years of doing IT and acquisitions. The last 4 years out in the private sector. Started with DCSA back in September. And before that, 37 years in the federal government. About 20 of that was as a federal CIO. The last 6 in the government was as U.S. Department of Justice Chief Information Officer. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And Nathan, over to you.
All right, Nathan Long. I am the Deputy CTO for Defense Information Systems Agency, Hosting and Compute. That's a little bit of a mouthful. So I am an Air Force veteran. After the Air Force, I came over, worked for DISA. I've been here in several capacities for almost 20 years now. Started out in the data center world, helping to host applications on physical data centers, and then slowly worked my way out to cloud. So I've lived a lot of the issues that people are dealing with modernization and moving from one environment over to the other, and looking forward to help share some of those stories.
Thanks, everybody. Looking forward to hearing them. So maybe to start off, it'd be fun to go around the group and hear a little bit about what's exciting you most about where your agency is heading from a technology perspective, and how your agency's mission is helping shape that. From maybe your perspective first, Nathan, what's standing out to you as most exciting?
I think the most exciting for me is starting to see some of the consolidation and embracing some of the commercial offerings that are slowly making their way over to the government side of the house. So starting out with bespoke tool sets, legacy architectures and applications that the workforce used to use, and being able to modernize and move to, in some cases, SaaS-based offerings or some on-prem offerings that leverage commercial technologies. And in leveraging those new technologies, getting rid of some of the legacy applications and starting to standardize around a consistent tool set. Because really, it's all about enabling the workforce to do the best work they can. And by standardizing on common applications, it enables them a consistent user experience. So that's probably one of the things that I'm most excited about right now.
Thanks, Nathan. And Joe, same question to you. Been enrolled for less than a year now.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it's all about DCSA's mission. We provide integrated security services to ensure a trusted workforce, secure the defense industrial base, and protect the nation's most critical technologies, and that underpins our U.S. military superiority and competitive advantage. DCSA is only 5 years old. We have significant IT modernizations underway. Probably the biggest one, the one that has gotten the most press, is the National Background Investigation Services, NBIS. And it's a suite of services that support the end-to-end processing for personnel vetting. We also have another program that's underway that's, I think, really critical, and that's integrated security data services to break down data silos of the legacy mission systems and manage data as that strategic asset. And that really is key to allowing us to move faster with cutting edge technologies like AI. We're intensely focused on accelerating the implementation of AI capabilities and other innovative solutions to really drive efficiency and effectiveness of both the mission and the business operations. Over. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And Jeanette, passing over to you, anything from that you want to kind of double down on that Joe pointed out there, or what do you want to add on top of that?
I can add a whole bunch of different stuff.
Please.
So I'm more aligned there with Nathan. The things that are exciting me right now are the things where we are consolidating, so we can get maximum efficiency. So we're looking at, improving our networks, bringing in under zero trust, using more of those commercial circuits. And I know DoD is working really hard right now to get that new policy out to make that easier for us to do. Consolidation of the help desk. Oftentimes we have system owners and they have their individual help desks to work with users on how to use their system. So employing AI capabilities so that we can do more self-service. Also employing those capabilities so that we can automatically look at help desks, the tickets that are coming in, and the system can actually go out and help to resolve those before you start getting numerous calls related to that. So I'm really excited about the things that we're doing where we're looking for efficiencies. We're looking for the trade space to maximize on the utilization of our tools and to cut back on the number of tools, but yet still improve our cybersecurity posture so that we can deliver capabilities and protect the data that we are entrusted with.
Great, thanks, Jeanette. And Mark, obviously a little bit of a different take, but what are you seeing as the most interesting things that your customer base is asking you about or leaning into, and where do you see yourselves investing or working on the coolest projects?
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I'm a little spoiled. I get to kind of look into the future. I have the luxury of getting to interact with our friends and allies overseas quite extensively, but also the global 1,000 companies, right? And if you look at companies that are publicly traded or not, they face an existential threat daily, right? They have to survive and be profitable, so they are effectively continuously in a state of offensive capability that they have to be ready to continue to move and be maneuverable. And because of that, on a technology front, you see a lot of really neat things. The most exciting thing for me is that I think in the last probably 8 months or so, AI, artificial intelligence, in whatever flavor you want to approach it, whether it's agentic or whatnot, is becoming really, really exciting. And it's very clear that we're on the cusp of kind of the next thing. And so a lot of what I get to observe is, a lot of us are acting like tiger cubs trying to be tigers. And I think over the next, year or 2 or 3, we're going to really start to mature and understand how to take advantage of those capabilities. Very briefly, just like one example, and this is something that ServiceNow has talked about years ago, but it's starting to come to fruition, is the idea of having the compute power to understand natural language, so what you're speaking and what that intent is, translating that into text, that text being translated into actual code, that code turning into an application, and then that application executing within the governance that's already loaded in as the parameters for an organization. Where we're going next with that is that it is not a persistent application, meaning it exists for when you need it and it goes dormant when you don't. For me, that's what's most exciting, over the next few years.
Great, Mark. That's actually really cool sounding. So looking forward to seeing that as it comes out. So when we think about for each of your core responsibilities, making sure you're prioritizing the right initiatives based upon the mission of your agency, right, or your team or your customer. Nathan, I know when we spoke a few days ago or a week ago, whenever that was, you pointed out really kind of 2 big things that you were thinking about right now. The mix of disconnected ops and leveraging AI more. I want to share with the group those 2 big things that you're focused on and how that ties to your agency's responsibility and mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of DISA, everybody looks at DISA as being able to provide the internet services, the telephones, the things of that nature to the entire department. When you start looking at some of those services that are overseas in OCONUS type locations, we have to start planning for environments where you may become disconnected, and isolating warfighters from some of those critical C2 apps. OCONUS is not really an option for us. So based on the feedback loop that we get from our mission partners and some of the warfighters overseas, we're working on some new capabilities where we're deploying cloud in OCONUS regions, so that even in disconnected ops, those that are overseas can still take advantage of the standardized application suites, standard tools, et cetera, regardless of the environment that they work in. So that one's directly based on the feedback, again, from those mission partners over in different theaters to make sure that we keep the services on when they need them. The other really interesting one that we are looking at, like everybody right now, with artificial intelligence and AI, we are looking to leverage it where we can. If you look at where the department was a few years ago, I think there was a little bit of fear around AI and how the data specifically would be leveraged. And so as we've worked with some of our commercial partners to move many of those models up to DoD networks into different impact levels, we look to leverage some of those models. And then we've also started to explore some private models that we can host on-prem so that we can even further secure that data. Where that really comes into play, AI has several different use cases. We are just starting to scratch the surface. We've looked at code generation to modernize apps, to modernize things off of mainframe. And we've also looked at AI for other use cases, such as just being able to provide consistency in the answers that we're giving to people, so that as different workforce transitions throughout their careers, that we have a good KM, a good knowledge base, knowledge management, and then leveraging AI to go against that knowledge management so that, again, as new things are learned, that knowledge management side is updated, and then we use AI for whether it be service desk agents or other entities to be able to query the same data to provide those consistent answers to our mission partners. So those are two of the main things that we're looking at right now.
Thanks, Nathan. And Joe, I know when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you talked about how coming into DCSA, there's really a focus on modernization at scale. And there's obviously a ton of data that is at DCSA that you're responsible for, a lot of potential AI use cases there. How are you prioritizing all of that? How are you really taking a look at all those different options and mapping them to what's most important to the mission?
Yeah, we have documented over dozens and dozens of I think it's over 50 different potential use cases for AI in the agency. But the number one priority from an acquisition perspective for DCSA continues to be in NBIS. We've got to deliver NBIS for all of our customer base. But I would say number two is probably the managing the data, the ISDS, getting that integrated view of the data, being able to actually leverage it for all of these different AI models. But one thing I'd like to highlight as well is that we're applying safe, lean, agile principles and implementing enterprise safe operating model across DCSA. And this is going to position us to operate with the agility of modern business while maintaining that federal compliance. And it'll bring clarity to our priorities. We'll use this new acquisition process model governance to help us prioritize and help us deliver outcomes that are focused and results that you would see at any results-driven organization. So streamlining our acquisition governance to make what I like to say value flow without interruption from end to end, from the need identification to value delivery, and making sure that all the stakeholders have a say in those priorities. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I'm actually going to jump to Mark quickly here. Mark, you talked about when we spoke, the speed of the decision cycle, accuracy of the decision, really everything you do is centered around that. And what Joe was just describing kind of pointed me towards you here. Talk a little bit more about how that's key to what you're seeing from your customer base as, and why that's leading ServiceNow to focus in those areas.
Yeah. Well, I guess two areas. One touches on what Nathan said and one on what Joe said. So with Nathan, when we're looking at disconnected operations, the way that we've always had a disconnected capability, for the, more on the intelligence side. But what we're looking at now is really survivability in the gap, right? So that when something does happen outside of the United States, and our our customers being the DoD, you can't just go like back in the day, you lose connectivity or power, you shut down the computer and you go to the grease board and you try to keep working after you break the chem lights so that you can see at night. The weapon systems and the amount of information that has to be processed just simply can't be processed that way anymore, at least not to remain effective. So the way we're approaching it is survivability locally. So continuing to operate in whatever bubble and connectivity you can have, still leveraging the systems that you're used to using, that your organization is trained to use, albeit at somewhat of a degraded state, but you can work around that. So for instance, if a decision tree involves something that comes back to a higher echelon of command that's not connected, as long as you have commander's intent, you can delegate authority temporarily down to that degraded network. So whatever the senior decision maker is still on that network is able to make those decisions. And then when they reconnect after that gap has been crossed, all that information can be resynced. So from Nathan's perspective, those are things we're working on now. And from Joe's perspective, we talk about speed and capability. We in the acquisition process, we were working with one of the branches on, let's just take one thing and see if we can make it better. And we looked at turning requirements into an actual RFI. That process with the reviews and making sure everything's been properly vetted was about 6 weeks. And we ran a very quick experiment with that team. And we took that 6-week process down to, and this is going to sound crazy, but under a few seconds. And then we measured kind of the accuracy of output on both, and they were identical, really. And I'm sure if we had run it more times, probably the one that was leveraging the system of action would have probably had a more consistent answer, because you would probably be rotating humans, through that. So you'd have different interpretations here and there. But that was most interesting for us.
Thanks, Mark. And it's a good story. And I shared the similar version of that story with me last week, and it's a good story. Jeanette, you talked in your introduction a little bit about prioritization, the trade space, and when we spoke previously a little bit about just bandwidth and the reality of that for the team. So how do you prioritize? What best practices do you put in place for your team to ensure that you are hitting the highest priority requirements and focusing in all the right areas with the reality of what bandwidth you have today?
So it varies depending on what's going on. Oftentimes, DoD dictates what that is, right? They publish capability planning guidance every year that tells us the things that they want us to focus on. They assign the deadlines for when they want those things to get done. And we bring that back and we look at all that we are currently doing, where we are in process, and have to manage that, right? Have to manage that against keeping the lights on day to day. So it's a balancing act. And as we all know, priorities change depending upon what's going on in the space. And we adapt and we overcome. Like everyone else, we're doing the best we can with the resources we have, and trying to make sure that we are showing that we're able to make the progress that is expected of us, and are effectively communicating where we may be assuming some risk or where we need some help along the way.
Thanks, Jeanette. And I know when we spoke, you talked about supporting your team with all hands meetings, but also encouraging put together IDPs, and talk a little bit about how you lead sort of a development culture or a growth culture during these times of complexity and change.
So for me, I think it's very important to upskill our people. One of the challenges we're all seeing is that AI and a lot of the things that are coming down the pipe for us are outpacing our workforce and the training that they are going through. When I am communicating with my staff, whether it's at all hands meetings, leadership meetings or even one-on-one, I encourage, and I don't think a meeting goes by that I don't say, hey guys, this is coming down the pipe, or this is in motion. This is what we're doing. Where are your areas of interest? What interests you the most? Let's get you signed up for some training. Let's get you that training so you get the exposure, so that as it's introduced to our environment, you're there and able to ask the meaningful questions to help you understand how you can best implement these capabilities in support of the agency and its mission. Can't hear you, James. You're on mute.
Thanks, Jeanette. I missed my click there. Joe, I know when we spoke to you, you talked a little bit about when you came on board and investment in training and the team. Do you want to share with the group some of the things you've done there to upskill?
Sure. Well, my team's a lot smaller than Jeanette's, but I think it's important that everybody focuses on developing this culture that embraces new ideas while ensuring adherence to legal and ethical standards. Leaders need to communicate the importance of compliance at all levels, and you can't communicate enough. I once worked for somebody who said you had to communicate the same message 7 different times through 7 different channels before somebody believes it's real. It's easy to delete an email without paying much attention to it. I think you also need to provide the training for employees on compliance requirements and emerging regulations. Training equips employees with the expertise in both emerging technologies and regulations to ensure adherence to the right standards. I think it's also important to encourage cross-functional collaboration between teams to ensure that there's a shared understanding of what does it mean to be compliant with something. I don't think of innovation and compliance as mutually exclusive. I think if you can build compliance into your strategic approach, you can really navigate the compliance hurdles and actually go faster, because people see these bumper guards, they know what they can do and how to go faster. And I just think lastly is clear metrics to track progress both in innovation and compliance adherence. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. And Mark, you talked about sort of creating a culture where it's okay to fail, it's okay to call, I think you said call spade a spade, right? And we want to talk a little bit about how you've seen that be successful, both ServiceNow and at your customers.
Yeah, where we see organizations really thrive and move forward at an accelerated pace is where you have this culture where it's okay to fail, right? And you have to set the conditions to where that's okay. So it's not okay to light your building on fire and say sorry, but you have to have the conditions in place that are right? So how do you do that? We don't just celebrate the victories and the wins. We do celebrate the swing and the miss, and we make it okay to do the post-mortem on what was the intent, right? And the intent was good, great. Now we analyze kind of what we were trying to do and what maybe didn't work, and we celebrate the attempt. And what that does is that encourages other people in the organization to basically say, man, I'd like to get recognized too. I think it's okay to try, right? And if this works out, it'll be great. But if it doesn't work out, at least they know I'm also trying to participate. And so as long as you have the right controls in place and you're communicating the intent of where we're trying to go, then that gets really exciting as people start to exercise in those ways. And it's amazing to see organizations where other leaders within that organization start to adopt that same principle, and just the ideas that come out and the effectiveness that starts to work as an organization just makes you that much more powerful. And as a really neat byproduct, the morale of the organization goes up exponentially as well.
Thanks, Mark. And Nathan, you kind of shared 2 different things with me that I wanted you to touch on here. One being, I think you referred to it as leveraging the authorization process, right? So using FedRAMP technology is sort of a safe space to work, but also your shift to DevSecOps and providing an IL5 environment where people can store, test, more safely. So you want to talk through some of those things for the group?
Yeah, so two things. So number one, especially when it comes to authorization, as I mentioned before, we're trying to leverage as many commercially available options within cloud as we can. The government has put together a rigorous set of tests to make sure that things are authorized for use. You get what they call provisional authorizations so that you can leverage them at different impact levels. What we try to do in working with a lot of our customers is when they start developing different things, we try to make sure that they are, begin with the end in mind. They try to look at the end state goal and they make sure that when they're developing in the commercial world, they're looking at the list of services that are authorized out in the DoD space so that as they're developing in commercial, they can move that up through the stack, the different classifications, impact levels, et cetera. If for whatever reason we find that there's some capability in the commercial world that isn't available for DoD yet, we try to work with those groups to work with our authorizing officials so that they can be authorized across the DoD. So that's kind of some of the safeguards that we try to work with to not only bring capability, but also encourage people to leverage the capability that's already out there. When it comes to upskilling people and doing cross-functional teams, we did have a project where we were trying to migrate over to DevSecOps. DevSecOps has got a lot of great benefits, but it's very intimidating when you start from scratch and dive headfirst into DevSecOps. And so what we found when we're trying to upskill a lot of that staff is explaining the problem set and going after the talent in the organization that is really thirsty to learn more, and bringing them in at the ground floor with the design and the development of that environment, building those cross-functional teams so that we're not engineering in a bubble and tossing it over the fence for somebody else to operate. The nice thing about starting to upskill these folks with DevSecOps backgrounds is not only do you gain efficiencies in the manpower because you're doing more with less by doing cross-functional teams where people are working on the app and the infrastructure and everything all in one, but you also create a solid code base that can be handed over to your authorizing official so that instead of having to go and look at 15, 20 different servers or even containers, you can go look at the code base from which the application is deployed on, and it takes you a step towards that continuous authorization so that you're not going through inspections every couple of years. If a security assessor wants to come in and look at your application, they have access directly to the code and they can look at it in a safe manner. So we've seen significant benefit for DevSecOps, not only in the security aspect, but also reducing outages and also starting to upskill our staff so that they're no longer siloed in one area, but they're starting to become a true cross-functional team and work across groups.
Thanks, Anthony. And thinking then about how there's a need to communicate these requirements now, right? So maybe those in this room understand some of these things, but when it comes to communicating to leadership or your staff or to oversight bodies, the public, what are some of the best practices we've seen there? So Joe, I know you talked about for your team setting up an environment first so they can move quickly, but how have you kind of handled communicating, externally outside of your team, some of the requirements for these things or the need for them?
Sure. Well, I have to work with a lot of different acquisition teams, but I think it's fair to say that balancing innovation and compliance can be challenging for government organizations as well as regulated industries, and the regulations don't always keep pace with technology. I'm a firm believer that technology usually leads the way, and to ensure compliance sometimes can require big investments in infrastructure and processes and staffing. And innovation is, everybody wants the latest thing, yesterday. So it is hard. And over-regulation can suffocate innovation, especially for smaller companies out there. I spent a lot of time working with industry, and you talk to a small company and they look at our security requirements and they're like, I can't play in that environment because of the regulations. So you've got to try to strike a balance. What's needed. I think Nathan hit on a couple of things, but it's that balance between regulation and compliance and innovation is is not easy. I think what's going to happen eventually is that we're going to get to a middle ground, especially with all the innovation that we're seeing out there in industry. It's going to merge where we're going to have a more robust environment that make it easier to bring in new cutting edge technologies. And that's one of the things that I've really been stressing is building that environment with our industry partners so that you can bring in new technologies on top of that strong foundation. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. And maybe Jeanette, over to you. I know you mentioned how a few years ago you helped implement Zero Trust at, I believe it was the Air Force. What did you kind of develop either from that story or other times in your career as best practices for some of the communication up and down the chain?
So I first implemented Zero Trust and ICAM requirements back in 2018 with the National Endowment for the Arts. So we were a little ahead of DoD, but much smaller organization. So DoD, is a big organization, and it takes a lot of planning, preparation to turn and move that ship, if you will. So for me, some of the challenges we see are, the high demand, because you don't have a lot of resources. Everybody's trying to keep the lights on, but yet you've got new stuff coming down the pipe. You've got to upskill people. You've got to find the funding, identify potential trade space so that you've got a chance of getting that funding, which is often an unfunded requirement because it wasn't part of the budget 5 years ago. So you're trying to get that in now, and then balance keeping the lights on with, hey, I've got to leverage this new capability in order to give me some breathing room to do all these other things that we need to do to be more secure, to facilitate all that we want to do with AI and other capabilities. There's, like Joe said, there's the complexity of the regulations. Fortunately or unfortunately, those regulations belong to the department. So the department will interpret those, and then they will come down to us as Fourth Estate or other components, agencies, and say, this is what we want you to do in support of the department. So that helps a little bit in giving us the guidance to meet the bigger DoD requirements and mission. And then, there's also the rapidly evolving threat landscape. I think this is probably the third time I've talked about it in the last month with folks from DoD CIO, DISA, and others, where they're using AI to teach our threat detection and monitoring capabilities. So they're using AI to teach our AI. And all that we have to do to be mindful of that and to put all of the different security components, pieces, parts in place to try to thwart that, to constantly be evolving, constantly be changing those algorithms and whatnot. We start then talking about quantum computing and getting into that, and how that is a disruptor to the legacy systems when all we're really trying to do is protect the ones that we have. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot that we're doing, a lot that we are either have in motion currently or are still exploring to try wherever we can to focus our manpower and our resources on those areas where we really need that human involvement from that intelligence capabilities and thinking through what do we have to do, vice the automating of the everyday things. Did that answer the question, James?
Yeah, it did, Jeanette. Thanks. And Mark, you talked earlier how you sort of have the benefit, or ServiceNow has the benefit of sitting across all of the department and more, corporates and so on. How are you collecting, sharing best practices out there? How are you informing teams of what's new, what's coming, what's important, and what you've seen as successes?
Yeah, something that we've done from the very beginning. So, going on more than 20 years now is we have customer conferences where we connect customer to customer, and they generate the content for those discussions, and we just like to facilitate the connections, and allowing those customers to connect and discuss, and the issues that they talk about based on their maturity level, on where they are, has benefited both sides. We also have special interest groups that we host where it'll be by vertical or by industry or by area, and those people get together. They also curate topics and they discuss. And then internally, what has worked well for us is, especially as we're introducing new concepts or technologies, we'll take someone that's really good at what that cutting edge item is. We try to boil it down to something that's relatable to everyone in that room, and we'll create like a problem statement of something to solve, knowing that the new capability can probably solve that problem. And all we do is provide the end state of, hey, we need this solved. And then everyone in teams that we curate, so that we make sure there's an expert in every team, does a little breakout for maybe 45 minutes to an hour. We bring everyone back and we share how they solved the problems. You wouldn't believe the ideas that you never even came up with on how to solve something that you can then apply to other things as well, that shake out from those types of engagements. So we do that a couple times a year, and that's been really, really powerful.
Yeah, sounds like a great culture. You talked before, Mark, about celebrating a swing and a miss. It sounds like it's just a great culture in general around trying new things, pushing the envelope in new areas, and so on. So appreciate that. Nathan, you talked about, you referred to it as the technician of the future, and really tied to cross-training your team and getting people exposed to all different technologies. You want to share a little bit about that and how you're running that program to not just upskill, but really broaden people's skill sets?
Yeah, so there's no perfect answer in how you get to what we call technician of the future, right? So at its core, what it's about is starting to break down some of those specific job skill set silos, if you will, where traditionally you've had a network engineer, you've had somebody that does operating support, somebody that does application support, starting to blend those together. And it kind of initiated. So again, I said at the beginning, I'm military background in the Air Force. I always had to learn the job of the person to the left and the right of me, because you never know when they're going to be there. So we're taking that same concept with the workforce today, specifically around trying to support our different mission partners, and teaching that operating system admin to learn a little bit about networking, to learn a little bit about the application. Once they start to get the feel for those different aspects, we start to introduce them into things like DevSecOps, where everything just becomes code. And you kind of pull out that abstraction layer of, I'm no longer doing ClickOps, but I'm starting to do things as code, and I can now push across multiple devices, and I take away whether it's a Windows or Red Hat or what have you. The settings might be slightly different, but at its core, you're still using code. So part of that journey for us for doing Technician of the Future is really starting to, I'll be honest and say, a coalition of the willing, of finding those people that are hungry for knowledge and saying, who wants to learn somebody else's job, and starting to blend them together. It works really well on standing up new systems, new applications, because they get in on the ground floor and grow their technical knowledge as that application or as that particular offering grows.
I think that's great, Nathan. And Jeanette, you talked about being on the executive industry board, I believe it was called, and then you were also meeting with other agencies to talk about specific vendors. I don't know if you want to share those specifically, but I'd love to hear a little bit about how you collaborate with your peers, cross government and elsewhere, to learn from each other.
Yeah, so I think there was two parts to that. So individually, I meet with different CIOs or stakeholders from other agencies and or internal to DoD. But specific to you, what you were talking about, and well, let me back up. So we talked about, I used to be one of the co-chairs of the Small Business Council for the federal government, right? So there we met regularly to talk with all the other small agencies in the federal space and collaborate on what are we doing, how are we getting it done, how are we finding the resources, who can support who with various information. Then we went on to talk about the fact that we work with multiple agencies, whether they're industry or our intra agencies, and so we were talking last week, I think it was, where the EIB had said, hey, they all get together to talk about requirements, but they'd never invited the CIOs to get together and participate and talk about what are we doing, what are we implementing, how can we be more interconnected to support one another. And I think when we talk about the requirements like zero trust or comply to connect and those types of things, we have to be connected. We have to have those conversations because what we are doing directly affects one another. And so there has to be more conversation around that. And so right now we're talking about, okay, how do we facilitate that those conversations between the other industry and federal CIOs so that not only do we understand each other and each other's requirements and or so we say roadblocks, but we can better plan for when those things are going to happen, what the impacts are if somebody doesn't do their part, what's that risk, and work together to figure out how to manage that and mitigate that.
Thanks, Jeanette. And Joe, something you shared that you do really hit home with me, where the simple version is to keep in contact with people that you've known throughout your career and those things, but the way you keep in contact is being more not just when you need something, right? But actual building, actual relationship building, asking people what they're working on, what's cool and new. Do you want to talk a little bit about your strategies for maintaining? Yeah.
Obviously, being in this space for 42 years, you have a lot of contacts and friends. And I'll look through my contact list, and if I haven't heard from somebody in a couple of months, I'll just reach out and say, "Hey, how's it going? What's new?" I think if the only time you're reaching out to your contacts, your friends in industry and government when you need something, you failed, right? I mean, you can do that, but it's much better, and it's actually it's a great opportunity to find out what other people are doing in other agencies, other companies, just reaching out and just connecting and see if they got 2 minutes to talk. So, yeah, thanks.
I love that, Joe. And we did have 2 questions in the chat. I know we're getting close to time here. We did have 2 questions in the chat. I appreciate Jeanette and Nathan for answering both, but there is one more open question here that I'll start with. So coming from Morgan Birch in our audience, what are your thoughts on the DoD CIO directed implementation of EICAM, how they're wanting fourth estate agencies to point back to their IDPs for authentication by the end of September, master update record authorization by the end of September 2028? How does that enhance zero trust while still maintaining internal authorization databases at the agency level? Open it up for the group, whoever wants to. Go ahead, Nathan.
I think I'll be the guilty party since EICAM falls within DISA's portfolio. I'll start by saying where it's actually helped me, right? So if you look back at my accounts 4-5 years ago, I probably had 5 or 6 different accounts, depending on what application I was trying to log into. Sometimes I had a CAC, sometimes I had a username password. It really varied. One of the benefits with migrating over to EICAM is the number of CAC prompts. For any of you that have seen authentication prompts, those start to go down because now you start to integrate with things like single sign-on, to where you log into your machine, you're logged in that one time, and then you get access to multiple things. the benefit of the master user record, and this ties more into zero trust. So by having a single master user record, you can now trace that person and what they're doing across the department. So no longer are you siloed into what are they accessing in DISA, what are they accessing in the Air Force or at DCSA, but you can track that user's movement across the different networks and be able to correlate data. So part benefit is to the user because they can log in every time with the same username and password, or not username and password, but authentication mechanism. But the real benefit starts to tie into zero trust and being able to correlate events for those users across the board. I want to make sure I make the distinction. So EICAM is doing a lot of the authentication pieces to validate that user identity while still enabling application users to do the authorization, which is where you grant specific system access based on the core attributes that are housed within EICAM. So a little bit of benefit both from security and from a user experience perspective, at least in my opinion.
Thanks for taking that one, Nathan.
Hey, James,
Go
if I could just maybe add to that as well. You know, having spent a lot of years in the private sector and supporting different government clients, it is challenging when you go look across the government. I mean, we're talking about DoD here, but it would sure be nice to have one ICAM solution across the federal government especially when you're supporting multiple clients. The other thing is that I mentioned our MBIS program. It supports the entire federal government. And you've got people that maybe have, obviously have CACs in DoD, but in other agencies, they have PIVs and other things. So, we really need to think about this at a maybe in a broader scale over.
If I would just add to that real quick. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think there are plans to be able to tie in the federal bridge for people that are outside of DoD CACs, because we experience those same issues when dealing with people outside of the DoD. So 100% agree.
Yeah, so I can help out a little bit here. I mean, that was a well thought out requirement that DoD identified many years ago and has been working towards. I think the Navy implemented their ICAM solution for their non-CAC holders back in November of 22, I believe. The Air Force had a solution in place. Often many of those people have implemented, or those MILDEPs have implemented Okta. DoD CIO has been supporting DMDC in providing MyAuth. It came out a little bit after some of us have already been down the road for providing ICAM capabilities for those that do not have CACs but need to use PIVs or some other form of multi-factor. So yeah, a known requirement, and one that everyone is looking to address. We talked earlier today about hub and spoke, where DMDC is providing MyAuth for people that don't have CAC cards and are using PIV or multi-factor authentication. And rather than creating a backlog for DMDC to implement those, they're talking right now about allowing a hub and spoke. So for somebody like DCSA, where we too have DICAM and are using Okta as our IDP, for us just to make the connection to DMDC so that our systems can continue to meet the timelines DoD has set out for connecting to ICAM capabilities. So well-known challenge. And I think we are all working in parallel or across collaboration to ensure that we have as few systems as possible to meet those requirements.
Thanks, Jeanette. A couple of minutes left. So I'll go around the group to wrap up here of, either A, something you want to touch on that we didn't spend time on today, and B, final word for the audience, your best advice, closing thoughts related to how to navigate IT modernization, how to make sure that you have the right markers in place to move forward successfully. Mark, I'll let you kick off.
Sure. Three things. I'll keep it quick. One, related to what everyone was talking about. At the end of the day, it's about reducing friction and moving each of those things that you talked about are really transactions, and moving a transaction in line Just like in the commercial world, if you're trying to go through a purchase online or moving a file around, the harder you make it, if there is a workaround, someone will take the easier way, which generally is the less secure way. So it's about reducing friction within the bounds of what you want people to do. So think about driving behavior that way. The other two things is, I guess my parting advice, two things. If you're looking at something and you want to, you're trying to do something new, if that capability is on a roadmap that you're looking at, don't build it yourself if it's coming in the next 12 to 18 months. A company is probably going to do a lot better job of putting it together, and they're going to have the support tail that's going to maintain that for probably the next decade. Often I see customers that are so focused on one thing that they're trying to achieve that they rush to it, and they do a decent job, but now you're stuck having to actually support that on your own. Whereas I always encourage people to get really, really, really good, be a center of excellence in what you have, and then hold vendors and companies accountable for the roadmap to get you what you're asking for, that they're telling you they're going to deliver. When you do it that way, I think it's more efficient use. And then the last point is around AI. And I'd mentioned this to James, I think last week when we were talking, but it's like a revelation for me a few weeks ago. One of my kids blew out her knee really bad, right? And I'd take her to an orthopedist, and they looked at everything. They did the MRI, and then in the digital medical record, the doctor's findings populated, and it was like 3 days before I could take her to the appointment for the readout. And I'm looking at what the surgeon had evaluated, and I couldn't make heads or tail of it, right? And so I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm going to use AI to try and figure out what this means. And here I am trying to ask a question, and my kids are looking at me, and one of them finally was like, Dad, move over. And she gets on my computer, she drops an image of that report into an AI prompter. She writes a prompt that I would have sworn a prompt engineer would have been required to develop, and it spit out a finding in regular language that I could understand, probable treatment plans, and when they would be able to return back to the athletic activity that they were originally trying to do, right? And when I went to the doctor, that surgeon gave me almost that exact same readout. And he was like, yeah, you wouldn't believe how many kids come in here knowing exactly what I'm going to say. My point with that is we are at a point where most of us on this call today, including myself, we are the grandparents that I had back in the day when I was trying to explain email to them, and they could not get over the fact that you don't have to pay for postage to send an email, right? Like, it just does not compute, right? Let alone that you could send it around the world and it still doesn't cost you anything, right? We are those people right now trying to understand the capabilities of AI, and our kids are the ones that can explain this to us. So embrace the youth in your organization. They are going to show you the things to do that we don't even know how to do.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. Jeanette, final thoughts from your perspective.
No, I just appreciate the time today and the panel members and hearing what everyone had to share. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jeanette. Joe, over to you.
Yeah, 5 things real fast. I would select and partner with technology platforms that embed compliance in their core architecture. I think that allows you to go faster and ensure compliance. Embrace open standards, interoperability, establish agile procurement processes. The Secretary of Defense has been really vocal about that. We need to go faster if we want to maintain our competitive edge. Adopt cloud computing architectures and implement zero trust security framework. Those are my final thoughts. Thanks. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thanks, Joe. Nathan, last but not least, final thoughts.
Keep mine short and sweet. The one piece of advice I would tell everybody is to be politely intrusive. So I think we've all agreed that policy hasn't kept up with technology in a lot of cases. And the only way that policy gets changed is if You are politely go in and ask why it's there and what it's trying to achieve. That's how change is made. So as technology evolves, just remember to be politely intrusive. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to all the panelists for the time today and sharing your insights with the audience. Thanks to the audience for joining us. Thanks to Leadership Connect's events team for organizing and getting this together. I appreciate everybody's time today, and have a good afternoon, everybody.